This is a garbage can. Now this is a garbage cannot, because what this piece of garbage cannot do is survive T16 maps. So the other day, I decided to put together a Holopalm Cyclone Raider, which was consequently followed by my Summon Reaper Juggernauts, and due to the psychological damage that these builds have inflicted on my mental, I had to retire completely from PoE and find a different game to play. But just like an addict always comes crawling back to the crack den, I naturally couldn't resist the allure that Ray class had to offer. And so the next great idea for a build that I had to try out was a Storm Brand Hierophant. Naturally, since the current meta involves taking advantage of the LE pen offered by the Inquisitor Ascendancy, I had to avoid picking an Ascendancy that would make my build too strong. This was to remain compliant with the casual certified build making guidelines. And since I don't have the capacity to utilize multiple brain cells at once, the Storm Brand Hierophant was the perfect build for me. So as you can see here, this is my Storm Brand Hierophant. It has neither the ability to survive while mapping, nor does it have the damage to kill Shaper Guardians. But the reason that this particular build will always sit near and dear to my heart is because it has room to fit a Cast on Death portal link into its gem setup. Now on a more serious note, the reason that this build is quite convenient is that it uses only a single aura in the entirety of its arsenal. Nowadays you will find that many meta builds will utilize somewhere on the order of 5 to 6 auras at a time in order to function properly. But because my smooth lizard brain would rather not activate a million auras every time I die, this build runs only one. The advantage of this is that we can also link it to Eternal Blessing support, which allows the build to reserve no mana at all and totally just skip over any mana reservation efficiency modifiers on the passive tree and on our gear. Because this build reserves no mana at all for stupid shit like auras, we can take advantage of mechanics like Mind Over Matter, Divine Guidance, and Arcane Cloak. This significantly improves survivability on top of adding more flat lightning damage to the Storm Brands. Personally, I don't really know if having Arcane Cloak is worth it though, since this build has pretty poor mana regeneration and doesn't deal damage anyways, so I do find myself just skipping over the use of Arcane Cloak, just so that I can survive more often in maps. If I'm fighting bosses that would otherwise one-shot me regardless of Arcane Cloak being active, I tend to use Arcane Cloak for the additional flat lightning damage in these scenarios. Now in order to actually deal enough damage to slay map bosses, this build uses Anathema to achieve a curse limit of 6. We use Bane to apply 5 of our hexes and then self-cast an additional Assassin's Mark to make up for the fact that this build was pretty poorly thought out. Slap on the Annihilating Lights, ignore your uncapped resistances, and you'll have a build that can at least tickle most T16 map bosses. Now the reason that we have uncapped resistance is not solely due to the anti-fun modifier on the Annihilating Lights, but actually because this build uses so many unique items. The only way that this build becomes remotely enjoyable is through the combination of Impulsa's and Storm's Gift. And since we have so few item slots left to make up for elemental resistances, I figured that capped LE res was an overrated build requirement anyways. And you know it's bad when you're scrambling for resistances on things like jewels and flasks. Now taking a look at the amulets, you'll begin to realize what truly makes this build my magnum opus for the Crucible League. There's no build on this planet that uses this dogshit amulet, but hey, if it works, it works. You got some much needed dexterity as well as cold resistance going on, and the Anoint also gives plus 15 to all LE res. Since we're running with so many power charges from the passive tree and Ascendancy, we'll want to also grab a Militant Faith in order to further scale our damage with Inner Conviction. This jewel also has 2 modifiers that scale shock effect as well as brand damage based on how many passives are allocated within its radius. The only caveat to using timeless jewels is that there's actually a specific role that can optimize the build further by transforming Lord of the Dead into Frenzied Faith. But since I couldn't be bothered for 1 extra frenzy charge, I decided to grab the cheapest one available instead. For the Ascendancy passives, we have Arcane Blessing for damage, Conviction of Power for synergy with Anathema, Divine Guidance for survivability, and Sanctuary of Thought for increased AoE. Personally, I'm not sure if Sanctuary of Thought is better than Illuminated Devotion in terms of survivability, since we're either looking to gain 600 flat ES versus spell damage leached as life. I tend to go for increasing the health pool whenever I can over leech effects, but that's really just my personal preference. Now if we take a look at our Bane setup, this is probably the most unhinged 6-link setup I've ever done. It is simply Bane linked to literally all the hexes that can synergize with Stormbrand. What's unfortunate is that Assassin's Mark can't also be linked into this setup, so you will have to allocate an entire brain lobe to push a separate button for that. Now if this build didn't already have too many buttons to push, I also decided to link an Orb of Storms with Culling Strike, increased AoE, and LE Prolif. I was honestly considering replacing the LE Prolif with something ridiculous like Blind or Chance to Flee, but I guess since LE Prolif synergizes quite well with Storm's Gift, we're gonna have to let it slide just this one time. Now taking a look at the main skill setup, you can already notice one glaring mistake. I'm playing Stormbrand, but if we can look past that, you'll notice that one of these things is not like the others, and that is because Inspiration should actually be Awakened Lightning damage. The only reason that I don't have it is because I ran out of chromes trying to recolor the staff, and I really don't want to go buy chromes right now. One of my favorite things about this build is how it makes me feel like an absolute goober playing PoE this late into the league instead of D4, but I guess it makes up for that in terms of clear speed. The ability to one-tap entire packs of mobs is honestly such a cheap gimmick that I'm still a sucker for, even though it means dying every other map. The biggest turnoff is likely the fact that it has such a small health pool, or the fact that it has uncapped LE res, or maybe that it really struggles with single target damage, but truthfully, by this point of the league, the charm in playing a build like this really just comes from my insistence on making a dumbass build out of a handful of uniques, and still somehow making it work anyways. Farming T16 maps honestly isn't too bad once you've got all your gems leveled and damage high enough to kill monsters before they kill you. And in the event that you are slain, Cast on Death Portal will at least save your sanity. To be completely honest, I didn't think that the bar could be set any lower after making my Summoned Reaper Juggernaut, but as the late Albert Einstein once said, the worst builds in raid class are just a Stormbrand away. So yeah, that's all I wanted to talk about.